Okay, it's officially time. First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone who's kind of jumped in here um, to maintain hope in community. I am pleased to see some familiar faces and reacquaint with some folks that we haven't spoken to in long enough that it feels like old friends have come to rejoin us for coffee. Mike and I are really happy to offer what we hope will be a place where you can finally feel home and, more importantly, safe and protected. Um, that's really what we want to provide, and offer the sense of community that once was and has been attempting to be again. So that's our goal. That's where we're wanting to be. For those of you that have just joined us and didn't hear the instructions earlier for the town hall, on the lower part of your screen, when you're looking at the town hall, there's a hand icon. Click that, and you'll be put in a queue to speak or type your question. If you choose to not ask a question, go ahead and click it again to remove yourself from the queue. Exit quietly will actually allow you to exit the town hall entirely. So really don't do that until you're sure that you're done. For those of you that have a question but don't voice or don't have a mic, what we have provided is a text-based channel called, aptly, Town Hall, which is located just above the AFK room. So if you have a question, please click the hand icon. You'll be invited to speak when it's your turn. We'll answer the questions that the person that's on the stage is presenting, and then you'll be moved back to the audience and we'll move on in that fashion. Again, if you don't voice, you'll type your question in the Town Hall channel and we will answer you in voice. And when we're done and have answered you to your satisfaction, we will move you back to the audience. I'm going to go ahead and invite Mike up here to speak. He's got the task of covering most of the topics today. So I'm going to let him do his thing and we're going to go ahead and get started.
Good afternoon, everybody. Just want to make sure real quick that you can hear me okay. It's good to see so many good friends and people. I'm glad for your interest. I hope we don't disappoint. We've got a lot of information to cover. As has been said, there's going to be a recording of this, plus text and other documentation. In fact, Callie's going to, if she hasn't already, she's going to publish some of this information to the website. And I'll touch on those things as I go through the information we have to talk about. But I just want to welcome everyone. It's the thing that I remember most fondly of InWorlds, and I'm kind of, I don't know if I wanted to start here, but I'm going to anyway. The thing that I was most fond of InWorlds was, to me, honestly, the community of people. There was just a real great sense of caring and connecting to each other. And that environment was very special in that regard. And then I got to experience another kind of community with the development group that helped to maintain it, working with Trank and Balpine and Jim and a few other people that were contributors, was one of the best times of my life, to be perfectly honest. And so I'm kind of glad to be coming around to this point. We were talking earlier, Callie and I, about why didn't we do this a couple of years ago, and I just don't think the time was right for it yet. But I do feel like it is now. I watched EG. I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but I will just briefly. I watched EG kind of develop, and again, I was struck with that community. Not so much by the management that was in place, but by the community that developed around a couple of core people. And I think it's a shame that in some ways the trust was lost and what was there kind of didn't really come to fruition. So I can say with all honesty that Callie and I are approaching this effort very much aware that we have to earn your trust and that we want to keep it and treat all of you in good faith. So, because what we're about and what we primarily are after with this effort is to provide a sense of community and a place for all of us to call home. So we're kind of hoping that Skye-Grid can become that. Anyway, I'm going to get into the rest of the presentation, and the main thing that we're going to talk about, what we got some questions in advance which were very helpful. There's a few things I want to mention up front that will help answer some of those questions. As I said, Callie is updating content on the website. So if you go to www.skye-grid.com, you'll see on the top right, there's a menu. There's a couple of documents that are there that relate to questions that were asked. There's a terms of service. We have a privacy policy, a DMCA policy, and GDPR is part of the privacy policy. And those should address, I think, a lot of the questions. I want to thank Balpine, by the way, for I was doing some work to revise our TOS, and I asked him if I could take a look at what he'd done for discovery, and I think it's very well worded. So I did combine kind of what we had with some of that and used it for this new effort. I think it's very important to be clear about terms like that. And so we've got those out there now for people to review. In terms of the grid as a whole, the status of the grid right now, last night I created our first avatars. We have servers in place in a data center. It's a good provider. I use OVH as my primary provider for server resources. They're a good company. I have 2 servers in place. The grid server is up and running. I am still working on assets, and we have a region server in place as well that I think will primarily host the public regions that we'll get to in a little bit, but also we'll add additional region servers as necessary to meet demand for individual private regions. I'm planning on building this. In the past, there's been a lot of focus on taking and using virtualization as a way, and I'm going to try and not go too much into technical details, but this one's important. But basically building a server with lots of virtual machines. My approach is a little different, and it's based on many, many years in IT and operations. I'm focusing on small to medium-sized servers that are with lots of cores, very powerful. Not lots of cores, but more clock rate. They're fast, and I don't want to overload those servers so that a lot of the things that people like to do, or still want to do, like naval battles or flying or things like that, all work the way we want them to. I think that overall the performance will be better if the grid is built out that way. And so that's where we're currently at. I'm expecting to have the administrative systems that I need to support account creation and the ability to turn up regions done in about a week's time. I basically have a little bit of it because I'm not building this out in the same model that's been used for Helsing in the past. I have to create some tools from scratch, but I'm well on the way to doing that. And I think like I said, in about a week, we should be able to start letting people create accounts. And we'll talk in a little bit about ordering regions and how to handle that. The big thing that I want to say is we are 100% motivated to do this right. I want to build a grid that performs the way people are used to in terms of past performance for in-worlds. I want to do something that feels like home, and I want to make sure that your data is safe and protected. We're doing some things related to backups and so on related to that. So Um, my focus is SL compatibility for the most part. I'd like to get this grid to a point where we can use the offerings from Firestorm directly, and there's no need for a kind of special Halcyon viewer or special viewer that's tied to just the grid. That means that there's going to have to be development to take place, because the current code base is, unfortunately, it hasn't seen a lot of updates since Inworlds went away, and that works. There just hasn't been changes because of that. So I've got a lot of work ahead of me. But the other thing that's worth calling attention to is that I do have a developer roadmap and some ideas on things I'd want to implement. A lot of it has to do with, again, addressing that compatibility. So the grid's not going to stay stagnant or stay put. It's going to grow and change and hopefully evolve, so we all have a better experience with it. The last thing I want, with regard to status, that I want to talk about is some content creators. There is we've had a couple of conversations. Callie especially has been super busy talking to content creators, and I had a few conversations as well. As many of you may know, we have Etheria on Utopia Sky as a merchant, and she sells the dinkies. I had a conversation with her this past week, and she's agreed that once we have the currency issue settled so that she can bring her store over, that she will do that, and we'll have dinkies on the new grid. So that's a good thing. Kayakers also had a conversation with him. He's agreed to bring some of his PayPal-based vendors over, and amongst other things, I'm sure, and make those available, so there'll be mechanisms for people to sell and get compensated that way. And we've had other conversations with other of the content creators that we know to try and get licenses. But this is a case where I think everybody here can really help. Many of you have relationships with SL content creators or others that you know where you like their work, and I would encourage you to have conversations and see if we can get them to embrace what we're trying to do here. If Callie or I can help with any of those kinds of conversations, we'd be happy to, and we'll do our best to try and make that happen. I just saw a note that Nobella had no audio, but it's disappeared, so I don't. Hopefully, that's addressed. Okay. So status. The main thing to address is that, like I said, we want to be in a position to let people create accounts and take orders for regions in about a week's time. We will open up a support mechanism we have to do that, and I'll touch on that in a bit. But we're hopefully about a week away from kind of starting to turn this thing up. My hope is that we're well on the way to do that by the end of this month, and I'd like to plan on having a nice party at the end of the year to really celebrate this thing kicking, and with all of you, because I think that we have an opportunity to do that, and we should be in good shape by then, well before then. So, okay, so development. There's a couple things I want to discuss. I mentioned that I have a development roadmap. There's so that the 26 item bug that's been kind of plaguing people for a while, I already have that fix in our code. I have to give thanks to Jim, first of all, for pasting me together with Hyacinth, who actually did the fix. Hyacinth did some sleuthing between the OpenSim code and Halcyon, and actually provided a fairly straightforward patch that fixes this issue. So that code is already in our code base that we're going to be running. There's a number of other issues that I'm aware of and working on. I know there's been a problem for quite a while with textures going gray. I have a fairly good handle on why that happens and some ideas on how to fix it. Um, so I'm going to try and work my way through some of these bugs as quickly as I possibly can once we get the grid up and operational, and that will improve our experience quite a bit. Like I said, my goal is to get things to a point where we are compatible with at least compatible with the OpenSim viewer and essentially compatible with Second Life. We may not support all the features, but the things that are there that need to work, like estates and so on, all work as expected. So that's going to be a focus for the near term, is just getting to that point so we can basically use a current viewer without problems. Related to that, we have an older version of Firestorm. I only have a Windows copy right now. I don't have, unfortunately, a Mac or Linux for an older version, and if I have to, I'll have a conversation with Beck, who is one of the maintainers in the Firestorm team, see if we can't get access to older builds. But we're going to make available a viewer that will work with the current code base. And then, as I said, as soon as we can move things to parity with SL so that you can use a current version, we will get to that point. I'm going to be doing a couple of enhancements in the near term that will help get data in and out of the system. I'd like to support IAR's inventory archives. The current code base only has that partially supported, and it's turned off. And we will of course support ORs, but I want to go over the code a little bit too when we do exports, because essentially when we make an OR available to you, the guidelines I'm going to follow are going to be that we would OR export anything that you are the creator of, or things that are marked exportable in their permissions. That gives us clear guidance that is meant to be externalized from the system. And then beyond that, I expect people will use ORs as a way to do backups and so on. So, like I said, IARs is something I'd like to get done. We have residents that are currently in Utopia Sky that I know would like to move content over, and I think that's going to be a gating factor, for instance, to get Etheria over. So I'll be definitely doing that work. There's been some other good suggestions on other enhancements. Zauber sent in a question a little while ago along those lines. I'm going to be basically taking input, and we'll do our best to kind of come up with a prioritized list of changes that need to get into the code. And I'll just continue to work those things so that my function primarily will be operations and the technology, and then just participating in grid activities with everybody else. But I really plan on continuing to improve the code base and making this work the way I think we all know it needs to for our experience to be good. I haven't gotten into pricing yet, so this is a little out of order, but I did want to mention one other thing before I move on. The pricing sheet does not have the old 2x2 concept that Inworlds had. It's something we talked about, and I could certainly do it in the code. I'm interested in feedback from others about whether that's something they would be interested in. I know they sold fairly well when Inworlds had them. We're going to, again, I'm putting the cart before the horse here. We're going to talk in just a second about the ticketing system, and that's actually a good mechanism to communicate with us on things like this. I would be interested in feedback on whether that's an offering that you'd be interested in over and above what we have on our price sheet. We'll get back to that as well. Yeah, so let's me pause for just a second. Clyder, you asked about other viewers. Again, because our goal is compatibility with Second Life to as much a degree as possible. Yeah, any viewer that will work with Second Life should be supportable in this environment. In terms of things that we will support as a company, my major target will be Firestorm, just because I think we have a relationship. We have a little bit of a working relationship with Beck and the other people. So, but let me take a second, and we'll open the floor to questions. The next step is to get to the questions that were asked and some support and operations information. And hopefully, I'm not losing everybody here, and you're getting the communication's good. So, all right,
Hello.
BG, you're on.
Okay. I was looking over the document that you have on the grid, the website, and it's very good. Actually, you answer all the questions there, which is great. My question is on the cash out policy. I understand everything you're saying, but will there be a way in the future to convert grid currency to money through PayPal? Is that in the plan, or is that something that will never happen?
Yeah, so that's a great question. For the credits that I mentioned that we mentioned in the questions, that will always only be credits. They won't be able to be converted. So I recognize that's a problem. It's nice to be able to pay for grid services like your tier and things like that with it. But in terms of cash outs, the main options that we'll have will be the Globit currency, which I'm going to do development work to try and support as soon as possible. And I'd like to eventually look at PayPal or some other kind of payment processor as a way to do direct payments to merchants. But
So
yeah,
as a as a performer, then I would want people to pay me in a way that I could go out through Globits.
yeah, ideally, I'm sure people are aware the big downside with something like PayPal is it's good for larger transactions, but not so good for smaller things
Right.
like you might tip in a club or something. For something like that, Globits is going to make a lot more sense, and it's well suited to it.
Okay. As long as there's a way, that was my
Yes.
question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right, that was it.
Mm-hmm.
You can shut me off now.
Any other questions before we move on? So up next, we're going to talk about the support and operations mechanisms, and I'll go through the Q&A a little bit. No questions? Okay, so I'll go ahead and move on then. So the next section I want to talk about is our support approach and operations. As I said on the website, which is www.skye-grid.com, there are sections there for good question. Okay. I'll just wrap up what I was about to say so people can find the website. Kelly's posting it. On the right-hand side, there is a section about the company, which lists the documents I talked about, the pricing sheet, the TOS, privacy policy, and GDPR, and policies and so on. Next to that, there's a separate section for support, and that's where we're going to focus on for a little bit. But let me get to Hans' question. Talking about account conflicts for loaded content. So, Han, are you referring to like loading something if we load an OR, for instance, and there's a user, you have a user, yeah, okay. So you have a user that's not in the system, and you don't want to lose that information. Yeah. I'm open to suggestions, actually, to that. My plan is to use the same mechanism that Jim provided for filtering, and as I understand it, that was an opt-in mechanism. So in other words, if you didn't opt in to have your content preserved, it would be filtered out when the OR was loaded. And we're definitely going to have to do some work on this before we bring regions up, so we have clear guidance on how to handle it. But there's two ways to do that, and I'm sure some of you know. If you load an OR, for instance, in OpenSim, what it'll do, if it doesn't know the owner, the creator gets preserved. It doesn't know the owner. You essentially get ownership of everything. We need to kind of resolve how that's handled, but there's also the issue of creators, and there are people with multiple older accounts that could get loaded, where you had an inroads account and then moved on someplace else, and there's account data from a number of different places. I think EG handled that by basically creating kind of a placeholder account for individuals when the ORs were loaded, and then you could claim that account if you had problems with it, or, if you wanted to get an account on the new grid. I could take that approach. Doesn't sound like it sits well with some people, and so this is an area again that I actually would be interested in feedback on. What makes the most sense from a content creator's perspective? So if you have thoughts about it, I would love to hear them. Yeah. So if you do this in OpenSim Grid, you kind of get this unknown user placeholder. It doesn't actually identify who the person is, and the idea is there. That's the other end of the spectrum, is to treat it as totally anonymous. I also could handle the renaming that you talked about, that you're suggesting, and basically say, hey, this is this person's new ID. They had these personalities in past grids. If you see any content with those IDs, map them into the new one, so that everything comes across as your new ID. That would take a little bit of extra development work, but I don't think it's hard to do. So, but again, this is a case where if you have thoughts about how to handle this, let's talk about it and figure out what makes the most sense, and that's what I'll get implemented. Yeah, but I mean, my goal is to make sure that you get valid content in, so there's comments in the TOS, obviously, that people need to be sure that they have a valid license for the content that's being imported. But beyond that, I want to make sure that it gets imported and assigned to the appropriate user, and that information is tracked correctly. But let's, and I don't want to, we can kind of problem solve this. I'll do it after, we can do it offline when the thing is, when we're done with the meeting. But I think that this is definitely an area where we should problem solve a bit and come up with something that works the best for everybody. But that's my goal, is to try and preserve identity where we can, and make sure that it's loaded. Yeah, definitely aware of it, and I'd like to find a way to sort it out that works best for all of the both content creators and consumers. All right.
Hey there. Hope you can
Hey,
hear me.
Groupie. Yep.
I wanted to just say something about that too, is that as Mike and I have been talking about this for quite some time, about provenance, figuring out who really owns stuff. And it's a complicated, fairly long thing we've been working on. We don't quite have all the answers, other than we want to make it so that content creators, whether they're bringing it in from different grids, have a way to identify their content as theirs. I think we should probably create a different topic for later on. We can get a bunch of content creators together so we can talk about this.
Yeah.
So just
Yep.
let's just at some point set that up, because it is an important thing, and it can be really long-winded.
Yes. Yeah, great point. I think we'll do that. We'll set up a separate forum where we can collect thoughts on how to handle this issue, because I agree it's not a simple one, and it would be good to get it right.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So at this point, all that information, as I said, should be public on the site. I am going to walk through the Q&A next. There's only a couple things. You guys can read the Q&A, so I'm not going to go over each individual point. And we've already had a question about one of the areas that I wanted to touch on, but I'm going to walk through this real quickly and touch on a few things. The question number 2, which is related to number 1, who has access to the servers? So Utopia Sky LLC is a registered corporation. It's Calliope and myself are the 2 sole owners of that corporation. And with regard to the grid, for the foreseeable future, Callie and myself will be the only people that will have access to the physical servers and the assets. If we ever did hire another additional employee, they would be covered under the corporation. They would be a part of the corporation and attached to that, and the liability of anybody touching something would be covered under the same mechanism. But so anybody that ever touches these servers is going to be a part of Utopia Sky. And for now, that means Calliope and myself. So that's one thing I wanted to talk about. There's no question 3 is about mentoring. A couple of people that have brought that up, interested in a mentoring program. I think that's a great idea as well. Volunteers especially are always welcome, but we need to, I would say that the thing to do would be define what that mentoring role would look like and how we want to approach it. We have the ticket system for real support issues, which can include some things that touch on that, but mentoring to me is about a community helping each other. Yeah, as Raven said. And so ideally, I would think that it would be great if we could maybe this is another area for a side working group to build a topic around, where we just explore what a mentor program might look like and how to organize it. But I think we would love to see that, absolutely. So we should kind of move forward, at least with collecting ideas. There's a couple questions on orders on demand and IARs. You can read the details, but essentially between now and the end of the year, we will waive the fees on those things. There will be fees after a certain point, but there should be small fees. I'd like to find a way, if I can, to actually make ORs, like taking an OR backup of your region self-service, but we'll definitely provide a mechanism for you to do that. I also am going to look at IARs as point 6 as it talks about that. Halcyon, the old mechanism, had a way to do sort of this, where you'd take a inventory backup. An IAR is a little bit different because the asset data gets copied with it. And if we did that, it would be the same filtering for creator or exportable would apply. So, but those are all things that we're definitely going to support. We want to basically provide mechanisms for you to take ownership of your data, the things that you're a creator of or that you've licensed, that you have export permission on. So we're going to try and provide mechanisms for that. There's another question a little farther down about backups. I think it was fairly late in the discussion. So the ORs and IARs provide a mechanism for backups as well that's externalizable. You can take a copy. But just for the grid as a whole, I want to make it very clear that we're going to have full backups of the entire grid. We'll do backups nightly, and my goal is to take an offsite a backup once a week, so that off of the hardware that is servers, we have a copy of all the data. So worst case scenarios, the data center that the stuff is in goes up in flames, which isn't so far-fetched because it did actually happen last year to this provider. And they actually had a good disaster recovery plan in place for the record, so they've been there and done that. But we will have an offsite backup. So worst case, the data would be a week old, and we would have a way to get it back. In best case scenario, there's a backup, and we can restore. If a server fails or something like that happens, we could restore from the local copies, and it would be current. So I'm going to have full backups of all the data that's relevant to operating the grid. And to me, that's just part of running a professional operational service. I said I wasn't going to talk about EG a lot, but that's I will just again for a second again. Even if something happened where there's some legal action and the servers have to be taken offline, the whole point of the backups would be that somebody, the new owner of the grid, should have been able to basically get new servers and take the backups and restore the state of the service. And that would be my goal, is to be able to ensure that the day-to-day operations of the grid are not dependent on a set of servers that aren't backed up and so on. So, and again, I didn't really talk about my background, but I have about 40 years of experience in operations and software development, and definitely run some very large data centers, including multinational corporations. So I know how to do this right, and I want to make sure that we apply that right thinking to operating the grid. It's part of the reason that the pricing is a little bit is not as, you can go, let's put it this way, you can find cheaper pricing in places. That's not the point of this. Our point with the pricing was actually to make sure that we covered our costs and that you ended up with a reliable service that was sustainable in the long term. All right, so we talked about backups. We can touch on the pricing real quick. There's an intro price in place through the end of the year for regular regions. There also is an intro region, which you can have one of, which has a cheaper price yet. So that's something that anybody would be able to take advantage of. And then finally, if you have a regular region, you can also buy a scenic region. The scenics will work exactly the same way as they did with InWorld's, same guidelines. You yourself or a partner can res on it. It's primarily there for scenic, like putting water space around a region or something like that. I think they'll be useful if we get to a point where we start to talk about continents and linking things together, because we can provide continuity across from one to the other with scenics. The prim allowance on a regular region is 45,000 prims. The scenic is 5,000. So that intro pricing for the regular region will be held through the end of the year, and then the price will go up to the $35 regular price. And then, like I said, the intro region is always going to be available. You can only have one of those, or the scenics. And I am interested, like I said, in back on the 2x2 and whether that kind of an offering would make sense for people. Okay. There's a couple of questions here. Yeah, so there's a couple questions here on waterways and open access. And Ellen actually is asking about grid oceans. So let's get to some of that. So we're going to offer a central area for the grid, public regions, if you will, that includes water. That will have the welcome region, and we have a picture of it. Kelly, if you can dig it out and you want to share it. Yeah, Hannah, I'll get back to that in just a second. Kelly, if you want to share the picture, or we can do that separately in a different mechanism. But we're going to basically have a set of public regions that'll include welcome. We'd like to have like some freebie shops, starter shops where people can get their avatars set up. Thank you, sweetheart. There are a couple of regions that we have. Utopia Sky Grid, this is related to Hans' question too, that we'd like to bring over. There's a memorial region to remember past friends that we've had that we've lost. This one is in name for Sophia Larkspur, who was a dear friend of ours that we lost, but it's a general purpose region for a memorial. There is a ballroom area, an area for kind of meditation and holistic stuff, and a few other things. There'll be sandboxes and also landing areas, planes and parking areas for boats, and all of this will be surrounded with water. There's a couple of regions there as well for events. So these are the kind of public regions that we're intending to provide for the grid to kind of get things kicked off and have a central area for people to come together. And then, as I said, it's connected with water all around it. So we don't really want to offer a mainland per se, because honestly, in our experience, they don't necessarily always do well. But if people want to get together as a group and develop one, like an HOA, if you will, where you have a set of rules as a group and say, well, we're going to follow this set of guidelines, always have object entry open, and so on, we'll provide a mechanism for that to be connected to this waterway. So you'll be able to basically traverse all of those things together. So I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but so as Kelly just posted, object entry will be on for all of the public region. And then if a group develops a continent, if you will, or and they want to connect to that, we'll facilitate that connection with water regions so that you can traverse from the continent that's been built to the public regions and across to any others that might exist. And then if anybody wants a private region, you have the option to either connect to one of those continents as they get developed, or you can put it, isolate it separately from the rest of the pieces if you want privacy. I know certainly that. So there's two options. In the second case, it's your land. You get to set the rules. And in the first case with the continent, we'll need people to step up to develop those. But once that happens, that group will develop a set of rules that it wants to follow as a group, and that can include water regions and traversal and so on. So the main thing the grid's going to provide is the public area at the center with water around it that people can connect into, where we will work with people that want to develop a continent and facilitate you connecting into this public area so that you have a way to traverse it as a whole and go to other areas as well. And then individuals that want private regions have the option to set those anywhere they want there's limits. And of course, if you can't put it next to another person's region without both parties agreeing to that, and all that stuff is spelled out in the terms of service. But if you create a private region, you set the guidelines and rules for how that region is run yourself. So, but no, we're not going to create. Logistically, we can't necessarily afford to create just waterways that are there around private regions because of the cost of hosting that stuff. Again, and we'll do some of that in order to facilitate connections. Like if I need to make a small section of water to span a continent and the public area, we can certainly do that. But I want to be sensitive to cost because, again, my plan is to host these things in such a way that they perform well and everything else. I don't want to be in a position to cram a lot of resources on a server and then everybody sees bad performance. So, and the pricing is really reflective of load balancing things pretty evenly, so people do see good performance. All right. That's the main thing I wanted to talk about with regard to the region layout. Han had asked about I think the question you're asking about, Han, is what's the plan with regard to Utopia Sky? We're going to run both grids. They have really different goals, actually. And well, not really different. They're both virtual worlds, of course, but Utopia Sky is going to remain a hyper accessible grid and open. We have residents that really want that experience. Although on Utopia Sky, for what it's worth, you can maintain a closed region. So the point is that it's already existing grid. It will stay that way. We have customers that are on that grid that want to be a part of that, and they want the ability to hypergrid out to other OpenSim environments. The Skye-Grid is going to remain a closed grid, the Helsing grid, without hypergrid capability. And I think we're seeing that there's an audience and a demand for that as well. So we'll run both grids together. In the Discord area, we have one Discord server, but we have multiple roles, and people can choose which of those quote communities they wish to participate in. So we've got Utopia Sky Grid in that section, and we also have the Skye-Grid section, and people can opt into one or both of those things and participate in those communities. Plus, we have some public areas like the coffee house and this town hall and so on. So I think to the degree that we can share resources between the communities, we will do that because that's beneficial to everybody. But also, if people want a sense of identity that's separate from each other. In other words, if you want to have Skye-Grid have its own identity and Utopia Sky have its own, those things will be maintained separately. The big reason being one of them is an open grid that allows hypergridding, and the other one is closed grid that has the experience that comes along with that. So hopefully that answered your question, Han. Okay. Do we need a short break, or how's everybody doing? All right. Okay, I'm just going to go forward then. We don't have a lot more to cover. So All right, so I'll touch on Ellen's question first. Ellen just posted a question. It was an idea to let people buy a water sim with a lower prim count than even Scenics, say for like $2. The problem with that is that from a resource perspective, just turning up a service to host that region takes a certain amount of resources on the server, and so it doesn't end up being cost effective. Because of the whole thing, we're, for instance, having to cover. I have to cover for the region servers a license for the Windows platform. Those things all have to get costed out and associated with things. So really, the $5 region is the lowest price that's practical for something like a waterway to make sense. And like I said, we will provide some water resources around the main public area plus connections to other things. But I really think that the Scenic is intended actually to provide that, a way to provide water space or low prim things on the grid, and also be respectful of the pricing and the costs and loading that has to happen on the server. Sorry, I think I need some coffee. Drew had asked about the intro price. The moderator answered it. Yeah, the price is good for as long as you own the region. It's sticky. So basically, if you buy in at the intro price, that's the price that you can take. So I might ask Callie to jump in real quick because there were some questions about the communities, and she can explain a little bit about Discord and how we have that set up. And then we'll come back and cover the last of the questions. And I want to talk through the support system as well. Although Callie could probably touch on that a little bit also.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So let's talk Discord real quick. And first of all, Lola, don't panic. You're fine. Sorry, had to say that. So Discord has evolved over the years, and they are constantly adding new tools and features, some of which are great, some of which cause more headaches than they're worth. One of the things that was really great was the community server option. The community server option allows us to have a greater wealth of resources available for our users, one of which we're using today, the Townhall. It also provides more protections from spam accounts. The wider adoption of Discord has also seen wider use by scammers and bots. And so these protections, you might have noticed them when you came into the server here. You had to actually accept the rules of the server, and then you had to actually select a role. Now, the role selection is put in by me. That's not an official Discord function. We make use of moderation bots and tools, most of which we pay for on our own to ensure that our community here is safe and protected. That role selection is what I want to kind of focus on. The role selection in this server, now it may be different in others, but in this server and generally in most servers that I create or manage, is designed to let people have the flexibility to choose the role that they identify with in the server. So if you come to this server because you're a Hypergrid visitor and you heard us in our club Fetish Fire and you wanted to hear us in Discord because you couldn't be there, you can do that and you would join as a guest, and that would give you access to the streaming lounge where you could tune into our broadcasts and things like that. If you're a USG resident, you would click on the rainbow and you would get access to the USG channels, the Utopia Sky Grid channels. And the same for Skye-Grid. You would click on the little sun, and that gives you access to the Skye-Grid channels. currently, the Skye-Grid channels are set up so that the general channel is available to anybody with the Skye-Grid tag. But you have to have that tag, that permission set, to see it. So if somebody in USG doesn't select the sun icon, they won't see the Skye-Grid channels. If somebody, conversely, in Skye-Grid doesn't select the rainbow, they won't see the Utopia Sky Grid channels. But the nice thing is, you as a user can take control of what you want to see. If you want to see both, you can click both. If you decide you don't want to, you can uncheck at any time either one of those. What happens is you come into a general channel, and so if somebody is curious about Skye-Grid, they can talk, to folks that are in there. There is a second set of permissions, obviously, for residents, not necessarily landowners, but people that create avatars on the grid are all considered residents. And that permission set is manually driven. So any user can come in here, accept the rules, and click on the Skye-Grid thing and be part of the discussion in the general channel. They can learn about Skye-Grid, they can ask questions from people who want to be helpful, but they can't really access the actual resident channels because those are driven behind a permission set that's given out by the admins. And so that's how privacy can be maintained and yet still be in a community that shares itself with a hypergrid accessible grid. Say that 10 times real fast. So Utopia Sky Grid has been up and running for over 3 years, has had zero downtime, and has evolved as well as Mike has added code and things like that and fixed bugs. But it's a small grid, beautifully done. We get a lot of traffic from hypergrid visitors, but at this moment, it's in a state where it's maintaining nicely. We'll still be doing changes and updates and progressing the grid. But while this grid is up and running, the nice thing is that Utopia Sky Grid, while we share residents, right, we've got folks that are going to be in both, um, is less busy than I think this one is going to be at the onset, at least until people get settled. And then we can kind of see how it all fleshes out. You know what I mean? But the two communities can coexist in one server. And I would strongly encourage that because there are people that are in this server that are hypergrid visitors that might wind up wanting to learn about Skye-Grid, or there are people in Skye-Grid that might decide they do want an avatar to have a hypergrid accessible kind of function. And in this way, we can better support and offer products and services to all of the folks that we call residents by having it in here. Um, I know a lot of folks aren't as well versed on Discord, and um, if you don't use it often, it's easy to forget how to use it. So I'm happy to help anyone at any time with any questions.
Thank you, sweetheart.
Mhm. And back to Mike.
So there's two things I want to address before we wrap up, and we'll open it up for general questions at the tail end. I want to talk about the economy. We touched on some of this stuff early on, but I think it's important enough that that we address it directly here. And then finally, I'd like to touch on the supports part of the site. And I can hopefully Callie can help me with that a little bit as well, talking through the support section, because one of the things we're going to ask people to do, there was a question on the list about how we're going to handle turning up regions once that capability is available. And essentially, it'll be first come, first served. In order to order a region, you'll put a ticket in, and we'll come through and work that list and get things up as quickly as we possibly can. But you'll have an opportunity to interact with that ticket system for a number of reasons. It could be questions you have, but also to potentially put in a ticket for services once we're able to fulfill them. Okay, so the money, the economy thing. We touched on this a little bit. Basically, for the grid to run a currency, there's a whole bunch of legal requirements that come along. And honestly, I'm not really sure how in today's environment a grid can afford the liability to do a direct currency, but some grids do. I'm not able to. I'm not a banker, actually. I'll put it that way. You guys don't really want me to run a currency because that's not my business. My business is software development and then operations, IT. So there are people that do that and or do currency exchange. The Globit environment is one that was mentioned earlier, and that's probably the best fit for the grid as in terms of a general currency that supports cash outs. There isn't currently Globit support in Helsing, but the money modules are fairly compatible. It'll take a little bit of porting to get it to work. And my plan is to do that as a way to supply the grid. You'll be able to set up a region as Globits as the currency that you're using. So when it comes up, that would be an option. The nice thing about Globits, if you're not familiar with it, they span multiple grids. So for instance, if you have cash tied up in Globits, and heaven forbid there's something happens to the grid, you're not out of that money. You basically can take it and spend it elsewhere or still cash it out, because we're not responsible as a grid owner for the cash outs and carrying the balance and providing backup funds to do cash outs and everything else. It's really a separate service that you're going to, so you're directly working with the monetary provider when you're using that currency. My goal is to create, and this is not uncommon, a good example of something like this is Kitely, a currency like Kitely credits, and which are, you can basically buy Kitely credits, you can spend them on regions that support Kitely credits. Our credits would be pretty much the same concept. You can, because you bought them from the grid as a customer, you can spend them on grid services. So for instance, it has a monetary value with regard to paying tier, and for services and so on. So you can spend that, but you can't cash it out. There's no way to convert it just directly to cash. And that's because, again, there is what it takes to do the cash outs is a lot of financial requirements. Like you have to register. I would have to register, for instance, in every state in the United States as well as in Europe with FinCEN, and provide. There's a lot of paperwork and so on that goes along with it. And that's just not possible to do and maintain. That would be me being a banker, and that's not the business we're trying to run. We're really trying to run a grid. So the credits provide a mechanism where people can spend currency that's grid local. The Globits would provide a capability that is cash outable, as in you can use it across multiple grids, and the person that provides Globit has already done the FinCEN requirements because they are a banker, and they'll handle transition from Globits to cash on your behalf. And then finally, I'd like to explore some options for other kinds of payment processors. The one that comes to mind the most is something like PayPal, but there are others that we could potentially do cash outs to. If we did that again, it would be the same as Globits. You would be doing, if somebody is paying you, they're doing a direct transaction with you. The grid is not really involved. It's not in the middle. And I totally understand the importance of all these issues, because especially in a closed grid environment, the economy is really important. It's how you handle acquiring content and so on is really done inside the environment. So as much as possible, I think we want to find a solution. But I just know that I cannot run a currency with the liability that comes along with it. So we're going to try and provide some other options for that. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, Zauber had asked about, I was going to get back to this. Are there plans to support Helsing's landmass region? So I'm not familiar with that, Zauber. If you can give me a bit more. Are you talking about the 2x2s? Or yeah, so we can certainly do 2x2s. Actually, we had talked about it. I didn't know if there would be demand for it. So it's not something we're doing initially, but it's really not. It's kind of, the 2x2 is kind of a billing mechanism, right? It's basically buying 4 regions with a prim counter spread across all 4 rather than 1 at a discounted rate. And yeah, I would definitely be interested in doing that if there's demand for it. That's something I could easily support. VAR regions are a little bit harder because they come along with a lot of support code that would have to be developed. So yes, if I was to do something like a larger kind of mechanism, I would definitely do the landmass regions in Helsing first, 2x2s. So if I'll take this as a vote for having them, and if anybody else is interested as well, let us know, and we'll see if we can't put something on the pricing sheet for it, because I think it's definitely supportable. The 2x2s, the landmass. So yes, Lex, a 2x2 is essentially 4 regions. It's they're organized together as one thing, but there's no reason they can't sit next to a regular region. Whereas, as you're pointing out, a VAR region had some interesting requirements with that. It couldn't actually do that because you get into instability in the viewer. Okay, so I'll take this as definite interest, and we'll work out the pricing details and so on. So that's an option for people, because I think it's definitely supportable. The 2x2 or landmass region is definitely supportable. Okay. Hopefully I haven't missed any other questions. All right, so to wrap up my stuff, I'd like to talk about the support site. Callie's done a bunch of work to put together a ticketing system that we're going to use there's a couple ways to use it. One would be bug reporting. There's a section in there for reporting a bug. I'm going to primarily monitor that myself. If bugs are put in, I may transfer them from the ticketing system into a real bug tracking system where we can set priorities on things and so on. But that's one option. There's a frequently asked questions section, a knowledge base that we're going to build out over time. So that's a potential resource for people with questions before they put a a ticket in. You can put a ticket in to ask a question. And the other thing that obviously is there is a mechanism to handle region orders, which we're not in a position to fulfill today. We'll be, like I said, it's about a week out. But if you want to start putting in tickets asking for regions with details about what you're looking for, we can absolutely start to accept those. The other thing that I would be interested in a ticket for is information about, we talked early on, I think Han asked a question about how to handle multiple identities. If you have guidance that you'd like to provide on how to handle that sort of thing, how you want to have handled, like I have IDs from these other grids, I want you to map them to this ID for on this grid, but these are all me. That's a good place to record those thoughts, because we'll go through and work through those as well. And Callie, if you're able, I'd like to turn over the rest of it. Since you actually did all the hard work to build out the support site, I actually would love you to just walk people through it real quick, so they know what they're doing. I just see you're posting some stuff that you might refer to.
Yeah, I mean, I spent some time trying to find a system that we could kind of run with, that would provide information to everyone in the least annoying way possible. So there's a couple of things. So support can be done by accessing the website. So if you go to skygrid.com and you hover over the support link, there's two options: the support tickets there, and of course, the answers to the questions that were posed and referenced today are also there. But if you click on the support ticket, you'll be presented with our support center, and you want to just go ahead and open a new ticket. So that's pretty self-explanatory. What you can do is you can open a ticket without registering. You can also check the status of that ticket without registering. Just make sure that when you get your email confirmation of your ticket number, that you have that handy when you go to reference it. Now, if you create an account, that will allow you to have access to all of your ticket history. So you can reference back to other tickets if you need to. That's something you can't do if you don't register for an account. Registering for an account should be fairly easy, but since this is the first time that we're actually having people, plug away at this, we may find that different. So I do ask for a little patience when you're trying to submit tickets, especially if you're wanting to submit region orders, with the understanding that region requests obviously can't be fulfilled today, but that we're looking to fulfill them soon. I believe Mike said he was hoping this coming weekend, barring any unforeseen exceptions or issues. So you want to make sure that you put the right information. You select, the most important part is you select the request region dropdown, because that will open up two fields that we need information from you on, and those are requested region name and requested estate name. And those can be the same or they can be different. And then when you submit your ticket, you should get a response back, which will go to your email. The thing I want to caution you on is, because this is a new system and it's a support system, typically that first response back to you, and maybe more if you don't change it, will wind up in spam. So you want to check your spam folder for a ticket from Skye-Grid support systems, and just, mark that as not spam. And then future ones shouldn't go to spam. I've put in a few ticket types, as you can see from the drop down there. There's abuse reporting for griefing, billing issues when that gets started, DMCA request. Feedback and suggestions is going to be a really great place for things like the 2x2 Zauber that you had mentioned, or any other grid enhancements that you would like to see that don't exist. And the nice thing is, I'm not sure what mechanism Mike has for adding things to the roadmap, but it could be something like, a voting system. The more people that vote on it, the higher it moves up in priority. That may be an option, or it may just be something that, we just kind of put in where it fits most naturally. But the goal is to get these feedbacks, reply that we've received it, and then just kind of work on them as the code allows. So those tickets you may find may sit for a while, but you should still keep the email that addresses that ticket so that if you don't make an account, you can go back in and check the status of it without having to register. That's again completely up to you. Um, the other kinds of tickets are GDPR report, general support, grid login, land issues, move land. These are pretty self-explanatory. Or request, region restart, report a bug, and request a region. The report a bug ticket will really need more information from you. Um, Receiving a ticket that says it doesn't work isn't going to help us fix it faster. Just saying. So, any information you can provide, any screenshots, anything like that, detailing it. The biggest and best thing you can give us when you're reporting something that isn't working is steps to reproduce. Literally steps to reproduce, because that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to figure out how to get the bug to happen so that we know where in the code to identify the bug, backtrace it, and kill it or fix it, whatever the case may be. So the more information you can provide is always going to be better. You are allowed to send attachments with the tickets. You can send as many attachments as you like, but they can't be any bigger than 2 megs. So be mindful when taking your screenshots that you don't send a screenshot of like all 3 of your monitors, which would be ginormous, things like that. Generally, as we start to use the system, we'll find that we need to tweak it and change it and make it, a little more easy. But I would strongly encourage you to start using the system because we don't have a mechanism for receipt of emails that say, "Hey, I need to, create a support ticket." There's really no way to take that email and put it in the system. So we really want you to get used to going to the support site from the start because then it just becomes habit. I think that was I think that was it.
Yep.
Are there any questions about support or anything like that that I should address?
One thing you didn't mention, I think we did a little bit, but is the concept of SLAs.
Oh, yes. SLAs are service level agreements. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. I just wanted to put that out there for any that weren't. What a service level agreement means is we agree to do the following by X amount of time. So in our system, we have service level agreements based on issue type, essentially. So if you put in a ticket and um, your region is down, we have an SLA of something like 12 hours. Now, generally, it's not going to be that long, but what that does do is it allows for overnight, the time when we're likely sleeping, so that, if we don't respond right that second, it doesn't mean we're not working on it. But what that does mean is that within 12 hours, we will get a reply on your ticket with some kind of direction so that you know that somebody's heard you, somebody's working on it, and what, if anything, we might need to do to get to resolution. A normal ticket that comes in, like requesting a region, um, enhancement requests, something like that, would fall under our standard SLA, which is a 24-hour turnaround. That means we have 24 hours to reply to you and say, we got your ticket, here's what we're thinking, or we got your ticket, we're still working on it. Some kind of communication. Our goal in doing this with you and picking this up and running with it is transparent communication where at all possible. Because in my mind, as far as a business goes, communication is key. Now, there's going to be some things, obviously, that as a business we don't share our entire business model with the world. But as far as like communicating with you, you're paying for the product. We owe you that communication. And that's the way we approach it. So I can't speak for anybody else, but that's always been our way of things, including with Utopia Sky Grid. And that's the way we'll continue to move forward with Skye-Grid. The only other SLA that we have at the minute is for ores. Obviously, we can't do those just yet, but when we do have them set up and we've got the system working as intended, we have I think we said 48 hours for SLA for ores. And that's because sometimes these ores can be really big. They can be really complex. They might need extra filtering. God only knows what could go wrong. And we want to make sure that we find the right place to, load them so that you can get them. If you've got a particularly large ore file, I've been told some of them have gotten as big as 6 gigs. Then we have to find somewhere to put that so that you can download it. You know what I mean? So we need some more time with that in order to make sure it's handled properly and given to you in a manner that is consistent with what you want. So at this minute, that's kind of what we've got set up, and we can always add, change, or add more as time goes on. But this support system is not to be a PETA. It's actually meant to help both you and us provide better service to each other. And that's it for me.
All right. So, if you can take a little bit of time in the ticketing system and get familiar with it, if you think you're going to be interacting with this, and we will, if based on digesting the pricing and so on, you think that you're interested in joining the grid, and you're going to want a region, you can put the tickets in for those at any time. And as soon as we're able, like I said, in about a week, to turn up regions, we will work through those in the order that we get them. I am sure I missed things that I wanted to talk about, but I think we've covered most everything that we had intended to. I wanted to wrap up a little bit with a comment about pricing. Because I want people to understand how we kind of arrived at what we're. So, in OpenSim as a whole, there's sort of been a bit of a race to the bottom. It's definitely possible to offer some things at a very low cost. But the old adage, you get what you pay for, kind of comes along with that picture. So when we sat down to do pricing for the grid, there are a couple of factors that we worked into this. I know for a fact that I do not want to build that. I want to use servers that are powerful but sized appropriately, and I want to make sure that we don't stack too many regions on a server such that performance suffers. I want to be able to add new region servers as needed when demand is there, and have that process work. I want to make sure that the data is secure and it's backed up, and that we can offer additional services on top of that, like the ORs and IARs that we talked about. And because of the software itself, there are some requirements, at least for the regions, that they need to run on Windows at present. It might be possible someday to address that through development and actually get a Linux server supported, which doesn't have a licensing requirement. But right now, in order to run the region servers, they have to run on Windows. And there is no legal scenario where you can run Windows for free. So I have to pay licenses for that, and that has to be factored into the price as well. Nothing that we're doing here. So if you look at, and I'm just going to comment on this for a second. If you look at the old InWorld's pricing, what we were all paying a couple of years ago when it was around, the costs in that scenario included a couple of people's salaries. So, the costs had to be higher because that was a cost of doing business. I have a full-time job in addition to doing this, and so I will. And we're not trying to cover my salary costs um, with this new offering, so that's not factored into the price. So therefore, we can come in at a lower price than what Inworld certainly was doing. Some of the support work that we're going to try and provide covers the cost for that, because it's a cost of doing business, and we want to run this primarily as a business. So we want to provide a level of service and quality that is consistent with a commercial business offering, and the prices are kind of set up to reflect that. And I think there will, if everything works as I expect, we will cover our costs and maybe a little bit more, so we have a little flexibility to add capacity or potentially do some projects for the grid. But overall, I think we're in a pretty good price point that reflects the needs of the grid, what it takes to run something, keep it reliable, and so on. So that's I just wanted to touch on pricing, because I know for some people they look at, you can go to, there are places you can go in OpenSim, for instance, and pay $2, $5 or so on for a region. And I'm not going to disparage anybody's offerings, but I do believe you get what you pay for. So that's the main thing that I wanted to address. And I know that this might actually be more money than some people are willing to spend. And if that's the case, I really am sorry. But I just want you to know that we're going to try the possible job we can to take care of this grid and your data. And that's all reflected in the structure that we set up. Yeah, and that's actually exactly how I look to. It's the community that you're buying into. If I'm doing my job right, that should be transparent. It should just work. So, okay. I think that's everything I had that I officially wanted to cover. I'm sure as soon as I stop, I'll think of something else. But we still have our Discord community, and people please feel free to ask questions. Like I said, the ticket system's there if you want to do something recorded that we respond to. That's helpful. I definitely want to get people's ideas on how to handle identity. The multiple personalities, multiple avatars with different accounts that are all the same person. Definitely want to get input on a number of things that we've talked about. So we're going to try and provide mechanisms to do that. This is more than anything else to me. This is about community first, and us building something that we all share together. That's the key thing. The takeaway is that we're about. And speaking of community, I want to thank Legion. He's been a huge help this week in helping us to shape some of our ideas about this. Legion, people I'm sure didn't know, but has been hiding out on Utopia Sky since we started the grid. He's actually was one of the very first people that came over, and I think he's excited about what we're doing, and I'm really excited to have his help, because he's got a wealth of information. He's been there, done this. So I really want to thank Legion verbally for all the help he's provided this week, feedback and kind of bouncing ideas around and so on. And also, I want to thank Balpine. He made a very generous offer. He has orders in a lot of cases for people that had come over from that were taken off of Inworlds, and he's very generously offered to work together with us to get your content on the grid. If he has an Aurora that you need, Ballpeen and I've worked together on the OpenSim side, and we're going to continue to do that with our NGC Sasquatch work. So that's a part of a community that I'm really pleased to be a part of too, because we help each other out, and it's a good thing. All right,
So
I'm
going to interject. For those of you who know of people that couldn't make it today, there will be a YouTube video that should include just the audio plus the text chatter from the town hall. The FAQ from the questions, the 30 questions you guys gave us in advance, is on the website and is viewable. So feel free to pass the website out to people. The pricing is also on the website. Again, feel free to pass the link out. If you have any questions, I can be reached in Discord pretty much all the time. So if I show live or away, send me a message. I promise you I will reply as soon as I'm able to. And I'm really, really happy for all the folks that believe in the community, because that's really what's going to make this thing a success, is the heart of the community that continues to grow. So I really want to thank you all for that and for your patience while we kind of make sure that all our ducks are in a row and all of our technology is devoid of gremlins, and we can bring everybody home. That's all I wanted to say. Sorry.
okay. So I'm going to open up the floor for just any general questions. Anything we didn't cover, stuff people want to say, because the general part of the meeting is done, but we're not done communicating, like I said. So, but if anyone else has a question or would like to jump in, feel free. If you do want to, there's a mechanism to raise your hand if you want to speak, or you can type in the town hall section. No takers? TDS was sorry, I'm blanking. Yeah, we talked a little. No, I knew this was coming. The nuclear dragon parts. So we talked about the community thing a little bit and continents, and I don't think we would be as successful at developing continents as individual people would, because they are passionate about it and they want to do that. But I would love to see that happen. And if we need to do anything to work with you on that, please let us know. Cool.
I would like to add that right now, this town hall stage and this town hall channel are open to anyone with a role. So if you marked that you were a Creators Guild, a resident of USG, a Skye-Grid hopeful, or that you weren't sure and are thus a guest, you're able to see this. But in order to see the Skye-Grid channels, you will need to make sure, if you haven't already, that you go back to the Rules channel and left-click the little sun emoji. That will open up the Skye-Grid channels for you. If you have an interest in being a resident on the grid, and I would hesitate to say now, let's wait until we get the grid up and can do avatar creation. You will then get a secondary role of SG resident. And that will be the private Skye-Grid section for in this Discord.
I think that was me, BG. I've got a little bit of a cold. Okay, Lex, I think you had a question. Go for it.
Hello, this is Lex. It's kind of a technical question relating to the viewer. Let's say we have the Skye-Grid tokens that are good for internal things on the closed grid, but can't be cashed out. And then down the road, hopefully not too far, we have another way, like with Globits or PayPal. How would the viewer handle that? Because I know, like in the upper row on the top of the viewer, we used to have IW with a $sign, and it showed you how many of whatever that currency you had was, or it could be G for Globits. But if you're running two different things at the same time, tokens and Globits, for example, how would that be handled?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the money module that's built into the region has a mechanism in it to push a currency symbol down to the viewer. So when today, if you're on an OpenSim grid where you go from one region to the other, and that region, it has different currency assigned as its default, the module will change the currency symbol and update the balance accordingly. So that's a mechanism that would work in this scenario, and that's a case where the whole region is one or the other. Like this is just Globits, or this is just tokens.
So if you have a DJ coming in to do a set, can they change it to whatever they want? Like if they want Globits as their tips versus tokens, or how would that work?
No, it's normally tied to the region. So that one of the things that we can look in is the ability to register a vendor with a given currency. That's actually going to take extra development. Balpi and I have been kicking that around a little bit. In that case, the currency symbol for the region would stay the same, and the vendor would have to somehow show that it's transacting a different way. But there's definitely some interesting work to be done to kind of get monetary systems to work the way we would expect them. But so for now, generally speaking, a region is got a single currency associated with it, and we'd like to find some way to handle multiple currencies, whether that's per vendor, like a single vendor, or at the region level if it's possible.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Balpine, I think you're up.
I just wanted to get some thoughts on that. Everything Mike said first. The viewer is designed to, just because of the way it was written, is to handle a currency on a region-wide basis. Actually, originally it was designed to only handle one thing, right, which was Linden dollars. Globit introduced and got the viewer people to introduce the notion of the message that gets pushed to the viewer that says, "Hi, I'm using Globits," or "I am using whatever." So that works. The problem is that on a per region basis, the only time you can change currencies by a region restart. So if you wanted to change from Globits to something else, the region would have to be restarted, and off it will go. And and I think that's something USG does, and Discovery does as well. But when we're talking about having multiple currencies like PayPal and a non-convertible virtual currency, you really want to have it. Ideally, you want it to be vendor specific.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where it gets interesting and a little bit more complicated. I've been working on that. I've talked a little bit with Mike about it too, which is to have a money module that understands a vendor specific sort of thing. And it is something I have been working on, and I'm going to share it with Mike. Actually, we'll share it with each other since we work together on a number of these sort of things. So, but it isn't something that's happening like next month. It's something that's a bit further out into the future. So think more like 6 months ish
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. So,
Yep, sounds good.
yeah. And one other thing, if you notice that, you know, we're working together, we've worked together for a really long time, you know, all the way since InWorld's days. So we have you know, we at this point our grids are both grids of friendship and grids of alliance.
Mm-hmm.
You may hear the term trusted grids. This is another concept that we've been floating, the idea that there would be a set of grids that would have similar operating principles and protection principles so that people could move across these grids safely, knowing that their content is safe. And that's a much longer term project, but it is something to consider, that that's something that we want to head towards, so that we have different communities with different identities, but they do have some common interests around content protection. And that also includes identity, which is the other thing
Yeah.
that's been asked about a lot, which is we need to have some kind of a federated database system that, you know, where people can have identity maintained, even if it means that especially it means that they have different users accounts, which are really the same person.
Right. Exactly. I absolutely agree.
Yeah. Okay. That's it for me now.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. I don't see any questions. I don't think I missed anything in the chat. So I'm going to just thank everybody for being here. This is it's a great turnout. I really appreciate your attention. I hope we can all come together and build something remarkable again, because I would love to see that happen. I have, like I said, many fond memories of the InWorlds. I mean, I met Callie there. We dated, and now we're together in real life. So virtual's always been a big part of my life, and it's really nice to see that this community's kind of persevered through all the changes and things that have happened. And I'm kind of hoping we can provide a good place for people to land, where we can all be a community again like we were. So, but thank you, because you're all part of that. Ellen had asked about the 2x2s. Ellen, I'll have to pull something together on that. The prim count will be essentially the same as a single full region. So like you'd take the 45,000 prims and spread them across 4. And I don't know yet about the pricing. I'll have to sit down and kind of work out what the pricing would look like to do it. But it would be, and they'll be partitionable. You can be able to use regions different purposes, but they'd be a single owner. I'll work that up, and we'll put something out as soon as I possibly can.
I know that there will be other questions that will come up. Please feel free to post them in the Skye-Grid general channel. I will link it in our town hall, so you guys can post questions there. Bring your friends if there's interest. If they're at all curious and just want to know, you can direct them to the website, and they can answer questions there or get questions answered there. Sorry, I just heard a meowing cat. Just want to make sure I didn't roll over a cat or something with my chair. That was a little frightening. Sorry. Crisis averted. It's all good. You can go back to your regular scheduled program. Yeah, so there will be future questions. That's none of this. That just by having this doesn't mean we've, negated the need for follow-up communication. But I think that's what is going to make this great, is that there will be follow-up communication. One of the things that we had talked about, and I wanted to kind of put this out there for you guys to think about and let it marinate a bit is we were talking about, at least for the onset of the grid and getting everybody settled, having monthly meetings. Just touch bases, really. In Discord, doesn't even have to be in Grid necessarily, but just to kind of get together and whatever date of the grid or whatever um, thing that we're working on the roadmap is coming to fruition or something like that. But certainly not as long as this one. Just more like touch bases to let you know we're here, we're working on things. Are there any issues, concerns? Stuff like that. And I think we should do that monthly, at least while things get set up and settled. And then we can move to a more quarterly fashion, which makes more sense for these types of things. But I want to be sensitive to the communication that hasn't, you know, been prominent in some of these other places. So I think that's important for you guys to kind of think about a bit. And I'll go ahead and put something on the calendar, and I'll get a link on the website to the calendar so you guys can kind of take a look at that too. So this is continuing to evolve. So um, don't change that dial. When you're ready to leave the town hall, simply click the red button at the bottom that says exit quietly, and that will exit you from the town hall. Thanks for coming, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much.